What if the leaders we criticize today are not unusually cynical, but unusually honest? When scandals erupt, when politicians break promises, when leaders justify morally troubling decisions in the name of stability, we often describe this as a crisis of ethics. But more than 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli asked a harder question. What if politics has its own rules, rules that do not always align with private morality? Today we turn to The Prince, one of the most controversial and misunderstood works in political philosophy. Far from being a manual for villains, it is a sober meditation on power, instability, leadership, and survival in dangerous times. And perhaps the most uncomfortable realization is this: Machiavelli may not be describing a corrupt world, he may be describing ours. The Prince was written in 1513 by Niccolò Machiavelli, a Florentine diplomat and civil servant. Italy at the time was not a unified nation. It was a fragmented collection of republics, duchies, papal territories, and city-states. Florence, Venice, Milan, Naples constantly shifting alliances and inviting foreign powers like France and Spain into their conflicts. Florence itself had expelled the Medici family, established a republic, and then fallen back under Medici control. Machiavelli served the Republican government. When the Medici returned to power, he was dismissed, imprisoned, tortured briefly, and exiled from political life. It was in this context of humiliation and political exclusion that he wrote The Prince. The book was dedicated to Lorenzo de' Medici. Whether this was an attempt to regain office or a genuine effort to offer political insight remains debated. But what is clear is this: Machiavelli had witnessed the collapse of states firsthand. He had seen leaders fail because they relied on idealism, mercenaries, or unstable alliances. The Prince mattered because it confronted a brutal reality. Italy was weak because its leaders misunderstood power. The central problem Machiavelli addresses is this: how can political authority be created and maintained in a world defined by instability, ambition, and human unpredictability? He is not primarily concerned with justice in the abstract. He is concerned with survival. For Machiavelli, a state that collapses cannot be moral. Order must precede virtue, stability must precede justice, and leaders must understand the world as it is, not as they wish it to be. Machiavelli distinguishes between private morality and political necessity. In private life, honesty and generosity are virtues. In political life, they may become liabilities. A ruler who always keeps promises may be destroyed by those who do not. A ruler who refuses to use force when necessary may lose the state entirely. This does not mean he celebrates cruelty. It means he insists that political survival has its own rationality. One of the most quoted and misunderstood lines in political thought, Machiavelli argues that love depends on the goodwill of others. Fear depends on control. In unstable times, control is more reliable than affection. But he adds a crucial qualification: a ruler must avoid being hated. Fear without hatred is stable. Hatred breeds rebellion. Fortune, for Machiavelli, represents the unpredictable forces of life: luck, chance, changing circumstances. Virtue is not virtue in the moral sense. It is strength, adaptability, boldness, strategic intelligence. Fortune controls half of events, he says. The other half belongs to human action. The successful leader is not passive. He adjusts, he anticipates, he acts decisively before crises escalate. Machiavelli is often accused of promoting hypocrisy. What he actually argues is more subtle. Politics is public perception. A ruler does not need to be perfectly merciful, faithful, humane, religious, but he must appear to be. Public trust depends not on inner purity, but on visible credibility. Machiavelli deeply admired founders, figures like Moses, Romulus, and Cyrus. Founders established new orders, but he also understood that institutions decay. When corruption spreads, political systems may require renewal, even harsh renewal. Stability sometimes requires decisive reordering. Why does this matter today? Because modern democracies still struggle with the tension between idealism and realism. Consider foreign policy. Leaders speak of human rights and international law, yet they negotiate with authoritarian regimes. They justify military action in the name of security. Is this hypocrisy or Machiavellian necessity? In media politics, image management is central. Campaign messaging, crisis communication, reputation strategy. Machiavelli anticipated this centuries ago. Leaders must manage perception because legitimacy depends on it. In economics, governments promise generosity, stimulus spending, welfare programs, tax cuts, but must also maintain fiscal stability. The tension between liberality and sustainability mirrors Machiavelli's warning. Excessive generosity weakens rulers. Even corporate leadership reflects his insights. CEOs must project confidence, manage risk, act decisively during crises. Too much hesitation invites takeover or collapse. We may not like the language of power, but we live inside its structures. What are the strengths of the prince? It is intellectually honest. Machiavelli refuses to disguise the realities of ambition, fear, and self-interest. He strips politics of comforting illusions. He also emphasizes responsibility. A ruler must think long-term. Rash cruelty is condemned. Weakness is dangerous. But there are criticisms. Some argue he legitimizes authoritarianism. Others say he underestimates the power of institutions and civic virtue. Democracies do not rely solely on fear or force. They depend on consent and participation. He may also overstate the necessity of manipulation. Modern political systems, though imperfect, have developed norms and checks that temper raw power. Is he misunderstood? Yes. Machiavelli does not celebrate evil. He studies it. He asks what works in conditions of instability. His realism can appear cynical because it rejects comforting moral simplifications. The enduring question of the prince is not whether leaders should be moral. It is this: can political order survive without hard decisions that conflict with private virtue? Machiavelli forces us to confront an uncomfortable possibility, that stability requires strength, that leadership requires adaptation, and that good intentions alone do not preserve states. We may reject his conclusions. We may temper them with democratic ideals. But we cannot ignore the problem he identified. Power exists, conflict persists, fortune shifts, and every generation must decide how to govern in a world that is rarely ideal. Perhaps that is why, 5 centuries later, we are still reading him.